There was a time when Earth, the warm, blue, life-giving world we know, was not so welcoming. Imagine standing on the edge of a frozen ocean, where the horizon stretches endlessly in white, not blue. The skies are cold and pale, the winds slice through the silence like knives, and the ground beneath your feet is sealed in ice miles thick. There is no sound of birds, no rush of rivers, no whisper of leaves, only the weight of silence, only the breath of death. Billions of years before humans ever existed, our planet faced one of its darkest chapters. A time when life itself nearly vanished. The Earth, once alive with primitive seas, froze completely from pole to pole. The oceans turned into a solid shell of ice. The continents disappeared beneath endless white blankets. The sun itself seemed powerless, its warmth reflected away by a shining mirror of frozen despair. For millions of years, Earth was a prison of ice. No rain fell, no rivers flowed. Only glaciers crept slowly, swallowing everything in their path. The few sparks of life that remained fought silently, hidden in tiny cracks of ice, clinging to survival when the planet itself seemed determined to erase them. This was not just a storm. This was not just a winter. This was Earth's deepest freeze, Snowball Earth. And if our ancestors' tiny, fragile organisms had not found a way to endure, we would not exist to tell this story. Humanity itself was balanced on the knife's edge of extinction, billions of years before we were even born. This is the story of how our planet nearly died, how it froze solid, and how against all odds, it thawed back to life. A story of silence and survival, of terror and rebirth. Stay with me until the end, because this frozen past holds warnings for our future. Before we step deeper into this icy journey, make sure to subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll never miss stories that reveal the hidden mysteries of our planet and universe. Your support helps us continue exploring these powerful truths together, unrecognizable. An Earth locked in ice, struggling between death and rebirth. We'll uncover how scientists piece together this frozen mystery, what evidence still lies hidden in the rocks, and how life managed to endure in the face of impossible odds. We'll ask questions that shake the ground beneath our feet. What caused the Earth to freeze entirely? How did life survive in such brutal conditions? And perhaps most importantly, what lessons does this frozen past carry for our fragile future? This is not just history. This is a survival story. The greatest survival story our planet has ever told. Long before the world froze, Earth was already an old traveler. The planet had formed billions of years earlier, born in fire and chaos. By the time the story of Snowball Earth was about to begin, the raging storms of creation had calmed. Volcanoes still roared, oceans still boiled in places, but Earth was no longer a ball of molten rock. It had become a world with oceans, land, and the first delicate traces of life. If you could have stood on the surface, you would not have seen forests or animals. There were no trees, no birds in the sky, no green meadows. Instead, the world was painted in shades of blue and gray. The seas stretched endlessly, quiet and heavy, filled with nothing more complex than tiny floating life forms, invisible to the naked eye. Life then was fragile. It existed mostly in the oceans, in the form of microorganisms. These small, single-celled beings drifted like dust in the water, clinging to survival. Yet, in their own silent way, they were rewriting the story of Earth. They breathed, they multiplied, and slowly they began to shape the atmosphere. They released oxygen, one tiny bubble at a time, changing the very air of the planet. They had no idea, of course, but their simple existence was building the foundation for everything that would come later, for forests, for animals, and eventually, for us. The continents at that time were bare and lifeless. No grass covered the soil, no flowers reached for sunlight. The land was harsh, filled with barren rocks and mountains, shaped by wind and erosion. The sky was different too. It did not always shine blue as it does today. Sometimes it was heavy with volcanic smoke, sometimes pale and hazy. And the sun, though still burning as it does now, seemed weaker. It gave light, but not enough warmth to stop what was coming. The Earth was alive, but in its own primitive, alien way. For scientists, reconstructing this world was like solving a mystery hidden inside stone. Rocks became the storytellers. Deep within cliffs, frozen inside mountain walls, buried beneath layers of soil, there were clues. Stripes of unusual minerals, scratches on ancient rocks, and layers of sediment told of ice where ice should never have been. In places close to the equator, far from the frozen poles, geologists found rocks marked by glaciers. These rocks bore scars-deep grooves, carved by ice that had once ground its way across the surface. But how could glaciers have reached the tropics, the warmest parts of the planet? It seemed impossible. At first, many scientists refused to believe it. The idea of an entire planet frozen over was too extreme, too terrifying. Some argued the evidence was mistaken, that maybe glaciers had been local, not global. But the clues kept piling up. Across Africa, Australia, North America, and China, the same strange layers appeared. Rocks filled with drop stones, large chunks of stone that could only have been carried and released by icebergs. These were found in places that should have been warm, tropical oceans millions of years ago. Something extraordinary had happened. And then came the colors, the strange banded layers of iron-rich rocks, known as banded iron formations. These layers, buried deep in ancient seabeds, told a story of oceans starved of oxygen. They revealed a time when the chemistry of the seas was thrown into chaos, when ice had locked away sunlight and life itself struggled to breathe. To the trained eye, these rocks whispered of a catastrophe on a planetary scale, the emotions of those early scientists who pieced this puzzle together. They stared at rocks older than imagination, rocks that had survived hundreds of millions of years, and realized they were holding proof that Earth had once been entombed in ice. It was not just a single frozen valley or a long winter. It was global. It was complete. The Earth itself had become a snowball. But before that catastrophe struck, Earth had been warm enough to host its fragile life. It was a world of balance, a balance that seemed eternal. The oceans had their gentle rhythms, tides pulled by the moon just as they are today. Primitive life flourished quietly, unseen and unheard. No predators hunted. No forests swayed. The world was simple, calm, and steady. Yet beneath that calm, forces were building. The continents were slowly drifting across the surface of the planet, inch by inch, year by year. Volcanoes exhaled gases into the sky. Weather wore down mountains, carrying dust into the sea. The atmosphere shifted slowly, almost invisibly, until the balance began to tip. It is heartbreaking to imagine. This world, fragile and quiet, never knew what was coming. The tiny forms of life that floated in its seas were innocent, unaware that the climate they depended on would soon turn against them. They could not see the glaciers forming, could not feel the air cooling. And yet, the stage was being set for one of the greatest transformations in Earth's history. This is where the story of Snowball Earth truly begins. In the silence of deep time, Earth prepared itself for a freeze unlike any other. The clues are locked in stone, and through them we see the warning signs. The continents shifting, the chemistry of the oceans changing, the balance of greenhouse gases slipping away. The warmth that had carried life so far began to falter. Scientists who studied these rocks often spoke with awe. Some admitted they felt chills when they realized what they were looking at. These were not just stones. They were memories. They were scars from a planet that had nearly died. To touch them was to touch the edge of survival itself. The thought is humbling. Our Earth, the same Earth we live on today, The same Earth that grows our food and shelters our homes once came within a breath of losing everything. If life had not endured those icy centuries, we would not exist. Every step we take today, every breath, every word we speak, all of it was made possible because somehow life held on. And so the stage was set. The warm seas and fragile life forms would soon face their greatest trial. The clues hidden in rocks and mountains told the story long before humans were here to listen. And the early scientists who uncovered those clues opened a doorway into a past both beautiful and terrifying. This is where our journey begins, on a world that seemed calm, but was already walking toward the edge of frozen silence. A world about to change forever. The world did not freeze overnight. It happened slowly, like a candle burning down to its last flicker. At first, the signs of change were almost invisible, hidden in the rhythm of winds, rains, and tides. The seas still moved gently, the sun still rose, and life continued as if nothing was wrong. But deep within the atmosphere, forces were shifting. It was as though the planet was breathing differently, taking in less warmth, releasing more cold. The balance of Earth's climate, once delicate and steady, began to tilt. One of the most powerful forces behind this great cooling was the land itself. The continents, though they move only inches in a year, were slowly drifting into places they had not been before. Over millions of years, they gathered closer to the equator, forming large landmasses that reflected sunlight instead of absorbing it. Normally, oceans near the equator absorb the sun's heat, holding it and spreading warmth across the planet. But when land replaced sea, the sun's energy bounced back into space. The world began to lose heat, bit by bit, like a body growing cold. Then came the weathering of rocks. On these new tropical continents, rain fell upon mountains, breaking them down grain by grain. Rivers carried these fragments into the oceans, dragging with them chemicals that trapped carbon dioxide from the air. And with each particle that washed away, more carbon dioxide was pulled from the sky. Carbon dioxide is like a blanket. It traps warmth close to Earth's surface. Without it, the warmth escapes into space. So as carbon dioxide levels dropped, the planet's blanket thinned. Earth, slowly but surely, began to shiver. Volcanoes added to this drama in their own way. For millions of years, volcanoes had erupted, pouring gases into the atmosphere, balancing the cycle of carbon dioxide. But at times, volcanic activity weakened, and less carbon dioxide was released. Without enough greenhouse gases, the Earth could not hold its warmth. The air grew thinner and colder. What once kept the oceans liquid began to fail. The first glaciers appeared quietly, far in the high mountains, where snow never melted. Year after year, the snow compacted into ice, pressing down with unimaginable weight. Slowly, these glaciers crept forward, grinding rock beneath them, carving valleys, pushing relentlessly toward the seas. It must have seemed harmless at first, just ice in the mountains, nothing unusual. But glaciers are patient. They do not stop. They do not retreat easily. And as the world cooled further, these rivers of ice spilled out of the highlands, moving into the lowlands, reaching places where ice had never touched before. Imagine standing on the shore of a once warm sea, watching as sheets of ice creep closer each season. At first, there would have been no panic. The waves still moved. The sun still shone. But the summers grew shorter, the winters longer. The ocean surface stiffened with frost. The ice did not melt when spring returned. It thickened instead, stretching farther, reflecting sunlight back into the sky. The more the earth cooled, the more ice spread. And the more ice spread, the more sunlight was reflected away. It was a vicious cycle, a trap from which there was no escape. The oceans themselves began to freeze from the edges inward. White sheets of ice pushed across the surface, carried by winds and currents. Beneath them, the water darkened, losing its warmth. The seas that had cradled life for billions of years were now turning into prisons. Tiny organisms that floated in the sunlight struggled as the surface froze above them, cutting off the energy they depended on. With less sunlight entering the water, photosynthesis slowed, oxygen levels dropped, and the oceans became hostile. Still, the glaciers marched on. What began as small patches of ice grew into continental sheets. They were unstoppable, stretching thousands of miles, swallowing valleys, mountains, and coastlines. They ground rock into powder, leaving scars that would remain for hundreds of millions of years. Their weight crushed the land beneath them, reshaping continents. Every day, every year, every century, the ice advanced farther, covering the planet in silence. From space, if anyone had been watching, Earth no longer looked blue and green. It was becoming white, a cold, gleaming sphere, reflecting sunlight like a mirror. The transformation was terrifyingly beautiful, an entire world locked inside ice, spinning in the darkness of the solar system. For the life that remained, this was not beauty. It was death. The tiny organisms in the oceans faced starvation as the sun disappeared behind the ice. Some found refuge near volcanic vents deep in the sea, where heat still rose from the planet's core. Others clung to thin films of liquid water trapped beneath the glaciers. But most could not survive. With every passing millennium, life grew weaker, more fragile, holding on only by chance. The air grew colder, the seas grew harder, and storms raged across the frozen continents. Blizzards swept endlessly, carrying ice and snow across lands that once basked in sunlight. The wind cut through everything, carrying with it the sound of emptiness. The earth, once alive with motion and rhythm, now fell into silence. This was the slow death of warmth, a transformation so complete that scientists who uncovered its evidence centuries later could hardly believe it. But the rocks did not lie. They carried the scars of glaciers that had reached the tropics. They carried the dropstones left by icebergs in places where no ice should ever have been. They carried the fingerprints of a planet frozen in despair. It is almost unbearable to imagine. The Earth, our home, a place that cradles life, had turned against it. The oceans had locked away their warmth. The air had lost its protection. The continents had conspired with the skies to bring about the deepest winter in history. The glaciers had marched across the world, patient and merciless, until nothing was left untouched. And so the Earth became a snowball, white from pole to pole, sealed beneath ice miles thick, a frozen sphere drifting through the blackness of space. For millions of years, this was our planet, a place of silence, of cold, of survival against impossible odds. But even in the darkest winters, deep beneath the ice, life still whispered. Fragile, hidden, waiting. It would endure, because the story of Earth was not finished yet. When Earth froze, it seemed as though life itself had reached the end of its story. The oceans, which had once been cradles of warmth and growth, were now trapped beneath miles of thick, unbroken ice. Sunlight could no longer reach the waters. A surface was a frozen lid, sealing the seas in eternal night. For countless living things, this was death. Without sunlight, the food chain collapsed. Without warmth, the oceans grew hostile. And yet, against all odds, life refused to give up. The survival of early organisms during Snowball Earth is one of the most remarkable tales in history. These were not plants or animals as we know them today. They were simple, microscopic beings, tiny cells without brains, without voices, without strength. But in their silence, they carried something far greater than power. They carried resilience. They were determined to endure, even in the most unforgiving world imaginable. Beneath the frozen shell of the oceans, thin cracks of liquid water remained. They were narrow, fragile, and often temporary, but in them, life clung on. These cracks acted like secret windows where faint rays of sunlight could sometimes slip through. In those rare beams, photosynthetic organisms' tiny cyanobacteria managed to survive. They absorbed what little light reached them and turned it into energy, holding on to existence in a world that seemed to want to erase them. It was not abundance. It was barely enough. But in the fight for survival, barely enough was everything. Even deeper, far below the frozen seas, another refuge pulsed with energy. On the ocean floor, where cracks in the Earth's crust released heat, hydrothermal vents created oases of life. Black smoke rose from these vents, carrying minerals and warmth into the icy darkness. Around them, primitive organisms found shelter. These vents became sanctuaries, hidden cities of survival, where microbes used chemicals instead of sunlight to feed themselves. They transformed poison into food, turning toxic gases into life. Imagine this world. Above, the ocean sealed in ice. Around, darkness that never lifted. But at the bottom, small pockets of life glowing faintly, like stars scattered in the void. In these lonely places, life held on, waiting for the day when the earth would thaw. It was not easy. Conditions were brutal beyond imagination. Oxygen levels dropped dangerously low. Nutrients were scarce. Entire species vanished forever. And yet, some endured, passing their strength forward generation after generation. They shrank, adapted, and found ways to live where no life should exist. This resilience is the reason we are here today. If they had failed, if they had surrendered, then the story of Earth would have ended under ice. There would be no forests, no animals, no humans, only silence. The beauty of this survival lies not in grand victories, but in small, stubborn acts of endurance. A single cell dividing in the dark. A tiny organism clinging to a vent, feeding on minerals. A colony of microbes hiding in cracks beneath the ice. They did not know they were shaping the future. They simply survived because survival was their only choice. Scientists who study this period speak of it with awe. To them, the rocks and sediments are not just evidence of glaciers and ice. They are proof of life's unbreakable spirit. Microfossils discovered in ancient rocks show that even during Snowball Earth, life persisted. The signs are faint, tiny imprints left by cells smaller than dust, but they are there. They whisper of survival in a time when everything else screamed extinction. Think of what it means. In the darkest chapter of Earth's history, when the planet itself was frozen and hostile, life still found a way. It teaches us something profound, that life is not fragile in the way we often think. Life bends, adapts, and waits. It does not surrender easily. But imagine the loneliness of that existence. Entire oceans silent, entire continents buried under ice, skies gray and lifeless. And in that vast emptiness, only small pockets of resistance. Only whispers of breath, hidden from the cold. Those organisms did not know the future, did not know that one day the ice would break. All they had was the present moment, the next breath, the next division, the next day. Their struggle was blind, but it was also heroic. This resilience of early life is the foundation of everything that came after. Without it, there would be no evolution, no rise of complex beings, no journey toward the humans who now tell this story. The courage of those tiny survivors is written in our DNA. Every cell in our body carries the memory of their endurance. When we breathe, when we walk, when we dream, it is because long ago, in a world frozen solid, life refused to die. The story of life under ice is not just about survival, it is about hope. It reminds us that even when conditions seem impossible, even when the world itself feels against us, there is always a way forward. The tiny organisms beneath the ice could not see the sun, but they carried the spark of survival until the sun returned. And so, through the long ages of silence, the earth remained alive, quiet, hidden, fragile, but alive. For millions of years, the planet drifted through space as a frozen sphere, But beneath the ice, life waited patiently. It endured the cold. It endured the dark. It endured the emptiness. And in the end, it endured long enough for the ice to break and for a new world to begin. Snowball Earth may have been the harshest trial our planet has ever faced, but it also became the greatest test of resilience. It asked life the hardest question: will you survive when there is no reason left to hope? And life answered with silence, with patience, with survival. That answer shaped the future. It shaped us. And it prepared the stage for the next chapter, when fire and ice would meet and the planet would begin to thaw. For millions of years, Earth lay trapped beneath its icy shell, a frozen world silent and pale, drifting through the darkness of space. Life clung on in hidden corners, but the planet itself seemed locked in death. The glaciers stretched endlessly. The oceans lay sealed under miles of ice. The winds carried only silence. Yet deep within the earth, where the cold could not reach, something else was stirring. Beneath the crust, the planet was still alive with fire. The core of Earth, burning with molten heat, never froze. Volcanoes, hidden under the ice or rising above it, continued their restless breathing. Slowly, quietly, they exhaled into the frozen air. With every eruption, they released carbon dioxide, sulfur, and other gases into the sky. At first, it seemed meaningless. The gases spread into an atmosphere already heavy with cold, already reflecting the sun's weak rays. The ice remained unmoved, the world unchanged. But volcanoes are patient. They do not stop. They erupt again and again, century after century, until their breath reshapes the sky. Carbon dioxide, invisible but powerful, began to gather. Under normal conditions, plants and rain would remove it from the atmosphere. But on a frozen Earth, there were no plants to breathe it in, no flowing rivers to wash it away. Nothing could balance it. And so, with every eruption, the invisible blanket around Earth grew thicker. The greenhouse effect, faint at first, began to rise. Slowly, painfully slowly, the air grew warmer. At first, the change was too small to notice. The ice held firm. The continents remained frozen. The oceans stayed locked beneath their icy prison. But deep inside the atmosphere, a battle was being fought. For millions of years, sunlight had been reflected back into space by the white surface of the planet. Now, more and more of that sunlight was being trapped. The balance shifted again. Imagine standing on the edge of that frozen world. For generations, the horizon had been endless white. The air had been thin, sharp, and cool. But now, faintly, almost imperceptibly, the sting of the wind softened. The cold did not cut quite as deep. Snow that once fell endlessly began to melt in places. The glaciers slowed their advance. Beneath the surface of the ice, in cracks of hidden water, the change could be felt. Droplets formed. Tiny streams began to trickle. For the first time in millions of years, the earth began to thaw. The warming did not come gently. It built like pressure in a sealed chamber, rising and rising until the world could no longer contain it. Carbon dioxide levels soared far higher than anything the planet had ever known. The greenhouse effect became overwhelming. Suddenly, the frozen grip of Snowball Earth began to shatter. The thaw was violent, brutal, and unstoppable. The ice sheets, miles thick, began to collapse. Oceans that had been locked in silence roared back to life. Meltwater rushed in floods across the continents, carving new valleys, reshaping the land in torrents of destruction. Icebergs shattered into fragments, filling the seas with thunder. The once still and silent world became a storm of chaos. As the ice retreated, the oceans boiled with energy. Not literally boiling in steam, but boiling with violence, massive waves crashing, storms tearing across the surface, temperatures swinging wildly as cold ice met rising heat. Imagine a world where seas, once frozen solid, now surged with floods and hurricanes. where skies that had been pale and empty now filled with black, raging clouds. Lightning split the heavens, and rain fell in torrents, washing away the dust of ages. This was not a gentle rebirth. It was violent, destructive, and terrifying. But it was also necessary. The ice that had silenced the world was gone, replaced by water rushing into every crack and corner. The land, crushed for millions of years beneath glaciers, rose again as the weight was lifted. Mountains emerged, valleys formed, rivers carved their way across the continents. The earth was alive again, but it was a different kind of life, wild, chaotic, and filled with power. For the organisms that had survived beneath the ice, this sudden change was both dangerous and miraculous. Some perished in the violent floods, unable to adapt to the storms of rebirth, but others flourished. Sunlight returned, pouring once more into the oceans. Cyanobacteria, hidden for so long, exploded back to life, spreading across the seas, releasing oxygen, and reshaping the chemistry of the planet. What had once been a prison became an ocean of opportunity. The air grew heavy with greenhouse gases, far thicker than today. Temperatures soared. After millions of years of cold, the Earth swung violently to heat. Some scientists believe the oceans may have reached near boiling in shallow regions, so intense was the warming. For a time, the world swung from one extreme to the other, from a frozen snowball to a furnace of storms and fire. Yet, through that chaos, balance eventually returned. The rains, endless and heavy, washed carbon dioxide out of the sky. Rocks absorbed it again. The oceans calmed, their chemistry shifting back toward stability. Slowly, painfully, the Earth found its middle ground, a climate not too hot, not too cold, a climate where life could not only survive, but grow. It is breathtaking to imagine this transformation. From silence to thunder, from stillness to chaos, from ice to fire. The Earth had been broken, shattered, and remade. The chains of ice had been torn apart by the planet's own fire, and in their place, a new world was born. The violent thaw was not just a return to warmth, it was a cleansing. It stripped away the old world and made room for something new. It prepared the Earth for the next chapter, for the rise of complex life, for the explosion of diversity that would follow. Without the thaw, without the storms and floods, without the fiery rebirth, there would be no forests, no animals, no humans. The lesson is clear. Even in its darkest winters, Earth carried the power to heal itself. The fire beneath the ice, the gases in the air, the balance waiting to be restored, all of it, was part of a cycle far greater than we can fully comprehend. And so, after millions of years of silence, the Earth roared back to life. The glaciers melted, the oceans surged, the skies stormed, and life once again rose from the shadows. The snowball was gone, and in its place stood a world alive with promise. When the ice finally broke, Earth was not the same planet it had been before. It had been scarred, reshaped, and reborn. The silence of millions of years was shattered by rushing floods, roaring storms, and sunlight pouring back into the oceans. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, warmth kissed the planet again. The seas opened, the skies cleared, and life once trapped in the shadows of survival was given a chance to breathe freely once more. At first, the world must have felt unstable, wild, and dangerous. The atmosphere was heavy with greenhouse gases, temperatures were swinging, and storms swept across the continents with violent force. Yet within that chaos lay the seeds of something extraordinary. The survivors of Snowball Earth, tiny, simple organisms that had clung to life in the darkest times, now found themselves in a world filled with new possibilities. The return of sunlight meant energy. The floods brought nutrients into the oceans. The release of carbon and oxygen created a chemical balance ready to support growth. It was as if the Earth, after being frozen in silence, was suddenly offering a gift, a stage for life to bloom. The oceans, once prisons, became cradles of creativity. Microbes multiplied in numbers never seen before, spreading across every corner of the seas. Cyanobacteria filled the waters with oxygen, transforming the very chemistry of Earth's atmosphere. With each passing generation, life grew not only in number, but also in complexity. Cells began to form partnerships, linking together, cooperating in ways that gave them strength. For the first time, multicellular organisms emerged, not just simple single-celled beings, but living things made of many parts, each working together as one. It was the first whisper of the diversity that was yet to come. And then, something extraordinary happened. Around 540 million years ago, life erupted in a sudden burst of creativity. Scientists call it the Cambrian explosion, a period when life did not just survive, but flourished in dazzling new forms. In a geological instant, compared to the vast age of Earth, the oceans filled with strange and beautiful creatures. If you could have seen the seas of the Cambrian period, you might not recognize them as our world. The waters were alive with forms that had never existed before. Soft-bodied animals swam through the currents. Creatures with hard shells and spiny armor crawled across the ocean floor. Eyes appeared for the first time, tiny sparks of vision, allowing animals to sense the world in new ways. Predators emerged, hunting for food, driving evolution forward with the struggle for survival. The seas became a stage of both wonder and terror, filled with life more diverse than ever before. It was as if the Earth, held back for millions of years beneath the weight of ice, had suddenly released all of its creative energy at once. Life bloomed in every shape and size, experimenting with forms, pushing the boundaries of survival. This explosion of diversity laid the foundation for everything that followed, for fish, for plants, for reptiles, for mammals, and eventually for us. The question is often asked, why did life flourish so suddenly after Snowball Earth? Scientists believe the answer lies in the trial of the freeze itself. The global ice age acted as a filter, wiping out the weak, leaving only the strongest and most adaptable organisms to survive. Those survivors carried resilience in their very being, and when the world thawed, they used that strength to expand rapidly. The harshest winter in Earth's history had been the ultimate test of survival. And when it ended, life rewarded itself with a celebration of diversity. Think of it this way. The Earth had been pushed to the edge of death. And in that silence, only the most patient, the most adaptable, the most unbreakable survived. When the ice chains broke, those survivors were not ordinary. They were champions of endurance. They were ready to seize the opportunity of warmth and light. That is why the Cambrian explosion was so dramatic, so sudden, and so powerful. It was not the beginning of life, but the awakening of life's full potential. Emotionally, this story carries a message as old as time itself. Out of struggle comes strength. Out of suffering comes growth. The very reason we exist is because long ago, life refused to die. It endured the unimaginable cold, the endless silence, and the crushing weight of ice. And when freedom came, it transformed that pain into beauty, into creativity, into an explosion of possibilities. Imagine the first creatures swimming through the newly thawed seas, their simple bodies moving in waters rich with nutrients. Imagine the first eyes opening to the light after millions of years of darkness. Imagine the first predator chasing its prey, the first heartbeat of a world alive again. Every wave, every ripple in those oceans carried the promise of a future yet to come, a future that would one day include forests, mountains, animals, and humans. Snowball Earth had been a prison, but it was also a forge. It melted away weakness and sharpened the will to survive. It carved life into something stronger, something capable of thriving in both struggle and abundance. Without the trial of ice, life might never have become so bold. Without the silence of millions of years, the song of the Cambrian explosion might never have been sung. And so, The Earth that emerged from its icy cage was not only warmer, but wiser. It had learned the value of resilience. Life had learned that survival is not only about strength, but about adaptation, patience, and courage. These lessons were passed on, written into the DNA of every living thing, carried forward through generations. And those lessons live within us today. When we look back on Snowball Earth, we see not just a frozen planet, but a story of transformation. It was the darkest night before the brightest dawn. It was the silence before the symphony. It was the trial before the triumph. The Cambrian seas, alive with wonder, marked the beginning of the modern story of life. They were the birthplace of diversity, of complexity, of the great tree of evolution. Every creature that swims today, every bird that flies, every human that walks, each one can trace its roots back to that moment of rebirth, that explosion of life after the thaw. Snowball Earth was not the end. It was the test that made everything possible. When we look back at the story of Snowball Earth, it is easy to feel that it belongs only to the distant past. A frozen planet, millions of years ago, locked in silence and shadow, seemed so far removed from the warm and colorful world we know today. But the truth is far more unsettling. Snowball Earth is not just a tale of history, it is also a warning. It tells us that our planet is fragile, that it can swing between extremes, and that even the smallest changes in balance can lead to unimaginable consequences. The first question that rises in our minds is simple but haunting. Could Earth freeze again? Scientists believe the answer is both no and yes. No, in the sense that our sun today is warmer and stronger than it was hundreds of millions of years ago. Its light and heat now make it harder for Earth to fall back into the kind of deep freeze that once covered the oceans in ice. But yes, in another sense, because Earth has always been a planet of cycles. Ice ages come and go. Warm periods rise and fall. The planet is a living system, constantly breathing in patterns of heat and cold, growth and decay. And though another full Snowball Earth may not happen, smaller, but still devastating freezes could return if the balance is disturbed. But the warning of Snowball Earth is not only about freezing, it is about balance itself. The Earth froze not because of one simple cause, but because small shifts work together in a chain of events. Volcanic activity, the movement of continents, changes in the air, all combine to tip the world into catastrophe. And what happens slowly then could happen quickly now, because humans have become a force of nature ourselves. Through burning coal, oil, and gas, through cutting forests and reshaping landscapes, we are changing the chemistry of the air, just as volcanoes once did. But unlike the slow march of natural processes, our actions are fast and relentless. We are altering the balance in decades, not millions of years. Snowball Earth whispers a message through the silence of time. Do not take balance for granted. When the Earth froze, life almost ended. Today, we face a different danger, the danger of overheating. Instead of ice creeping across the continents, we now see glaciers melting, seas rising, and storms growing more violent. The lesson is the same. The planet will always respond to imbalance, and the response will not be gentle. There is a painful irony here. The very gases that once saved Earth from its icy prison carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are the same gases we are now releasing in dangerous amounts. Back then, volcanoes filled the air with carbon dioxide, trapping heat, melting the ice, and giving life a second chance. Today, we are filling the air with those same gases, but without the ice to absorb their effects. Instead of warming a frozen world, we are overheating a living one. And once again, the survival of life hangs in the balance. Snowball Earth also teaches us something about resilience. The tiny organisms that survived the freeze did so by adapting, by hiding in cracks of ice, by clinging to warmth in the deep sea. They remind us that life can endure even in the harshest conditions. But the question we must ask ourselves is this: will humanity, with all its knowledge and power, show the same resilience? Or will we push the planet past a point where our survival is no longer certain? Emotionally, the story strikes a deep chord. Our world is not guaranteed to remain safe. The forests, the oceans, the blue skies above us, they are not permanent gifts. They are fragile blessings, shaped by billions of years of struggle and survival. We stand on ground that was once frozen solid, surrounded by air that was once toxic, under a sun that once seemed powerless. And yet, here we are breathing, living, dreaming. That is the miracle of survival. But it is also a responsibility. Every generation holds the earth in its hands, just as life once clung to survival in the cracks of ice. The choices we make now, how we use energy, how we treat the air, how we respect the forests and seas, will decide whether our planet remains a cradle of life or becomes a furnace of suffering. If Snowball Earth teaches us anything, it is that the planet does not forgive imbalance. It always reacts. And we must choose whether that reaction becomes a story of rebirth or a story of loss. Imagine the silence of Snowball Earth, the endless ice stretching from horizon to horizon. Imagine how close life came to being erased forever. Now imagine a future where the silence is not caused by ice, but by heat, where oceans have risen, forests have burned, and species have disappeared. That future is not a distant nightmare. It is a possibility that grows closer with every day of inaction. And yet, there is hope. Snowball Earth shows us that life can endure, that balance can be restored, that even after the darkest winter, a new dawn is possible. If life could survive the crushing silence of global ice, then we too can survive the challenges we face today. But we must listen, we must act. We must remember that the story of Earth is not written only in rocks and ice, but in the choices of those who walk upon it now. Our place in this fragile cycle of survival is both humbling and empowering. Humbling because we are reminded that we are just one part of a long, ancient story, a story written by microbes, by oceans, by ice, and by fire. Empowering because unlike the tiny organisms of Snowball Earth, we have knowledge. We can see the patterns of the past. We can understand the dangers of the present. And with that knowledge comes responsibility, the responsibility to protect the balance of our only home. The final lesson is clear. Earth does not belong to us. We belong to Earth. It will continue with or without us, just as it continued through Snowball Earth. But if we wish to remain part of this story, if we wish for future generations to walk beneath the same skies and dream the same dreams, then we must respect the balance that keeps us alive. Snowball Earth is not just a chapter in history. It is a mirror. It shows us what happens when balance is broken. It reminds us that survival is never guaranteed. And it asks us a simple, powerful question. Will we learn from the past, or will we repeat it? When we look back at Snowball Earth, we are not only gazing into the past, we are staring into a mirror that reflects who we are today. Our planet, once locked in silence beneath endless ice, reminds us of the fragile thread upon which all life hangs. It reminds us that survival is never guaranteed, that it is earned, tested, and passed down through generations of struggle. Every breath we take is a gift from those tiny organisms that refused to give up when the world froze. Every heartbeat is tied to a chain of survival that stretches back billions of years. We are not separate from that story. We are the living continuation of it. Humanity is here because life, in its most fragile form, found the strength to endure when the universe seemed determined to erase it. And so, when we stand beneath the open sky, when we feel the warmth of the sun, or hear the crash of the ocean waves, we should remember. These moments are possible only because our planet thawed, because life fought back, because the earth itself was reborn. We are children of resilience. We are the descendants of survival. But with that gift comes a responsibility. The Earth does not belong to us. We belong to the Earth, and the story of balance is still being written. Just as ice once tested life, today it is heat and imbalance that challenge us. The same cycle that nearly ended life can begin again, in another form, if we do not learn. Snowball Earth is not just history. It is a lesson, and perhaps even a warning. Yet there is also hope. The same way life broke free from its icy chains, we too can rise above the challenges of our age. We can choose balance. We can choose care. We can choose to be the guardians of this fragile planet instead of its undoing. This is why we tell these stories, not to fear the past, but to learn from it, to honor it, and to carry its wisdom forward. If this journey through Earth's frozen history moved you, if it reminded you of the beauty and fragility of life, then I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to our channel. Join us as we continue to explore the mysteries of Earth and the universe. And together, let us keep these stories alive. Because in the end, the greatest survival story ever told is not finished. It is still being written by us, here, now.